The autumn rain hammered against the terracotta tiles of the stable roof, each drop echoing through the stone courtyard like distant thunder. Gabriela Perez stood in the doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the chill, watching the storm sweep across the valley below. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse screamed, not the whinny of fear, but the cry of pure unbridled fury. "He's at it again," her cousin Maya said, appearing beside her with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Third night this week. The stable hands are terrified." Gabriela took the offered cup, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. "Have they tried?" "Everything," Maya interrupted. "More hay, less hay, music, silence. Nothing calms him. Your uncle wants to sell him before someone gets killed." In the distance, lightning illuminated the old stone stable where the horse was kept isolated from the others. For just a moment, Gabriela thought she saw a pale-shaped rear against the bars of the stall door, magnificent and terrible. The horse was called Phantasma, which meant ghost, an Andalusian stallion, pure white with a coat that seemed to glow even in darkness. He'd arrived at the Hacienda Vientos 3 months ago, purchased at extraordinary expense by Gabriela's uncle, Don Rodrigo Perez. The horse came from a legendary bloodline descended from the royal Carthusian horses that had been bred for kings and emperors. His conformation was perfect, his movements pure poetry. He was also completely unmanageable. Gabriela was 22 years old, the daughter of Don Rodrigo's deceased younger brother. Her parents had died in a plane crash when she was 7, and she'd been raised on this estate in the mountains of Andalusia by her uncle's family. The Perez family had bred and trained horses for 4 generations, supplying animals to DR competitions, film productions, and wealthy collectors across Europe. Gabriela had grown up surrounded by horses. She learned to ride before she could properly read, spent her childhood mucking stalls and mending tack. But despite her skill and knowledge, she remained perpetually in the shadows of her cousins. Maya was the eldest, beautiful and confident, already managing the estate's business operations at 26. The twins, Javier and Christian, were natural horsemen who could ride anything with 4 legs. Gabriela was the quiet one, the careful one, the one who'd never quite fit into the family's bold, passionate energy. Don Rodrigo treated her kindly enough, but she always felt like a guest in someone else's house. Tolerated, but never truly belonging. "You should stay away from that stable," Maya said, reading something in Gabriela's expression. "Phantasma is dangerous. Even father won't go near him anymore." But Gabriela was already thinking about those screams. Not fear, fury. And beneath the fury, something else. Something she recognized because she'd felt it herself all her life. Loneliness. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Gabriela woke before sunrise, dressed quietly, and slipped out of the main house before anyone else stirred. The estate grounds were beautiful in the early light with groves of cork oak trees and stone walls covered in climbing roses. In the distance, the Sierra de Grazalema rose against the pale sky, still dusted with snow on the highest peaks. The stable where Phantasma was kept stood apart from the main training facilities. It was an older building, its stones dark with age, with thick walls and heavy doors designed for the powerful Carthusian war horses of centuries past. Gabriela approached slowly, listening. Inside, she heard movement, the scrape of hooves against stone, the rustle of hay. She peered through a gap in the door and caught her breath. Phantasma stood in the largest stall, his white coat almost luminous in the dim interior. He was enormous, 16½ hands at least, with a thick arched neck and the compact, powerful build characteristic of his breed. His mane and tail were long and silky, cascading like water. But it was his eyes that arrested Gabriela's attention, dark, intelligent, and filled with a rage that seemed to burn. As she watched, a stable hand approached the stall with a water bucket. Phantasma immediately charged the door, striking it with such force that the wood cracked. The young man jumped back, water sloshing everywhere. "Easy, devil horse," the man muttered, setting down the bucket at a safe distance. "You can die of thirst for all I care." Gabriela waited until the stable hand left before entering. The interior smelled of hay, leather, and the particular scent of horses, earthy and warm. Phantasma tracked her movement with his eyes, but didn't charge. She moved to stand outside his stall, far enough to be safe, but close enough to see him clearly. "Hello," she said softly. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her voice. He pawed the ground once, a warning. "I know you're angry," Gabriela continued, keeping her tone even and calm. "I don't blame you. This isn't what you expected, is it? They promised you were coming to a place of honor and instead you're locked in a prison." Phantasma snorted, tossing his magnificent head. But he didn't charge. He stood watching her, muscles tense, ready to explode into violence, but holding back. "I won't hurt you," Gabriela whispered. "I just wanted to see you, to understand." She stayed for an hour, speaking softly, never approaching the stall door. She told him about the estate, about the mountains, about nothing important, just letting him grow accustomed to her voice. When she finally left, Phantasma was standing close to the door, listening. That evening at dinner, the family gathered in the large dining room overlooking the valley. Don Rodrigo sat at the head of the table, his weathered face thoughtful as he cut into his roasted lamb. "I've made a decision about the white stallion," he announced. "I'm selling him to a dealer in France. He'll be someone else's problem." Gabriela's fork clattered against her plate. "But uncle, his bloodline is worthless if the horse can't be ridden or handled." Don Rodrigo interrupted, not unkindly. "I've invested a fortune in that animal, and all I have to show for it is damaged equipment and terrified staff. Tomorrow I'm calling the dealer. Give me 2 months, Gabriella heard herself say. The table fell silent. Ma stared at her. The twins exchanged glances. Don Rodrigo set down his wineglass slowly. What did you say? Gabriella's heart hammered, but she forced herself to meet her uncle's gaze. Give me 2 months to work with Phantasma. If I can't make progress, you can sell him with my blessing. Gabriella, Don Rodrigo said gently, I appreciate your courage, but that horse is beyond help. Professional trainers have tried. Veterinarians examined him and found nothing physically wrong. He's simply vicious. He's traumatized, Gabriella said. Something happened to him before he came here. He doesn't trust anyone. And you think you can change that? Javier asked, not mockingly, but genuinely curious. I think I can try. Don Rodrigo studied her for a long moment. Gabriella saw him weighing the risk, a potential waste of time, the danger to his niece, but she also saw something else flicker in his eyes, a memory perhaps of her father. His younger brother had been known for his way with difficult horses. 1 month, Don Rodrigo finally said, not 2. In 1 month, if you haven't made significant progress, the horse goes to France. And if you're injured in any way, the deal is off immediately. Understood? Gabriella nodded, not trusting her voice. You're insane, Mia said later that night, cornering Gabriella in her bedroom. That horse will kill you. Maybe, Gabriella said, pulling her long, dark hair into a braid. But I have to try. Why? What's Phantasma to you? Gabriella paused, considering how to explain the inexplicable connection she felt to the tortured stallion. Because everyone's given up on him, she finally said. Just like everyone's given up on me ever being more than the orphan cousin who helps around the stables. Maya's expression softened. Gabriella, no one thinks they do, Gabriella said quietly. You don't mean to, but you all do. I'm the quiet one, the careful one, the one who will never be as bold as Javier or as clever as Christian or as capable as you. And maybe they're right. But if I can help Phantasma, if I can reach him when no one else could, she trailed off, shrugging. Then you'll prove you're more than they thought. Maya finished. She pulled Gabriella into a fierce hug. Then be careful, Prima. I need my favorite cousin alive. Gabriella began her work the next morning. She arrived at Phantasma's stable before dawn, carrying nothing but an old wooden stool. She set it down outside the stall and sat. The stallion emerged from the shadows of his stall like a ghost materializing from mist. He regarded her with those dark intelligent eyes, his body tense with potential aggression. Good morning, Gabriella said softly. I brought you something. She pulled an apple from her pocket, not a fresh one, but an older fruit, slightly wrinkled. Her grandmother had taught her that horses often preferred aged apples, finding them sweeter. She held it up so Phantasma could see, then placed it on the ground halfway between them. The stallion didn't move. They stayed that way for 2 hours, Gabriella sitting quietly, Phantasma watching her. The apples slowly browning between them. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and golden light began filtering through the high windows, Gabriella stood slowly and left. The apple was gone when she returned that afternoon. Over the following days, Gabriella established a routine. She arrived at dawn and sat outside Phantasma's stall for 2 hours before beginning her regular work around the estate. She'd return at midday with water and feed, moving slowly and predictably. In the evening, she'd come back for another 2 hours of simply sitting and speaking softly. She talked about everything and nothing, the weather, the other horses on the estate, her memories of her parents. She sang old folk songs her mother had taught her, haunting melodies that echoed through the stone building. Phantasma never approached the stall door, but Gabriella noticed he positioned himself where he could see her clearly. On the 5th day, Gabriella brought a brush, not to use on Phantasma, but to groom herself. She sat on her stool and began running it through her long hair, the rhythmic strokes creating a soft, repetitive sound. Phantasma's ears perked forward, mesmerized by the motion. By the end of the first week, the stallion was standing at the stall door whenever Gabriella arrived. He didn't try to bite or strike anymore. He simply watched her with those impossibly dark eyes waiting. You were someone's beloved companion once, Gabriella told him one morning. I can see it in the way you move, the way you listen. Someone trained you with kindness, and then something terrible happened. They betrayed you, didn't they? Phantasma made a sound deep in his chest. Not quite a whinny, but something more complex. Agreement, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement that she understood. Gabriella's family began noticing changes. The screaming at night had stopped. The stable hands reported that Phantasma no longer charged his door every time someone passed. Don Rodrigo said nothing, but Gabriella caught him watching from a distance, sometimes, his expression unreadable. After 2 weeks, Gabriella took her biggest risk yet. She opened Phantasma's stall door. Not fully, just enough to slip inside, moving with excruciating slowness. The stallion backed into the far corner, his eyes wide, muscles coiled. Gabriella kept her gaze soft, her movements fluid and non-threatening. She pressed her back against the wall near the door, giving Phantasma all the space he needed. I'm not here to trap you, she said softly. I'm just here to share your space. You're in control always. They stayed that way for an hour. Phantasma in his corner, Gabriella against the wall. The door opened behind her. Finally, the stallion took one step forward, then another. He stretched his neck toward her, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Gabriella held perfectly still, barely breathing. Phantasma's velvet nose came within inches of her face. She could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the sweetness of hay on him. This was the moment of truth, the point where the horse would either accept her or attack. Phantasma snuffled softly against her hair, then her cheek. Then he took a step back and returned to his corner, but something had shifted between them. A boundary had been crossed. Over the next days, Gabriella gradually increased their contact. She moved around the stall while Phantasma watched, never cornering him, always giving him escape routes. She introduced the brush, first just showing it to him, then eventually running it gently along his powerful shoulder. The first time she touched him, Phantasma flinched so hard he nearly fell. But he didn't strike. He allowed it. Someone beat you, Gabriella realized one day, noticing faint scars along his flanks. That's why you're so afraid. They hurt you when you didn't understand what they wanted. Anger flared in her chest, hot and protective. What kind of person took an animal as magnificent as Phantasma and broke him through cruelty? She made a silent promise then. She would never use force, never use fear. She would teach Phantasma that not all humans were monsters. 3 weeks into her month, Gabriella attempted to put a halter on Phantasma. She'd spent days desensitizing him to the sight and smell of the leather, letting him investigate it, even letting him chew on it when curiosity got the better of him. Now moving with infinite patience, she slipped it over his head. Phantasma exploded. He reared, striking out with his front hooves. Gabriella dropped flat to the ground, rolling away as tons of horse flesh came crashing down where she'd been standing. The stallion bucked, throwing his hindquarters into the air, smashing the water trough with a single powerful kick. Gabriella scrambled to her feet and stood perfectly still against the wall. Phantasma was having a full panic attack, his eyes rolling white, foam flying from his mouth. But even in his terror, he didn't charge her. Instead, he circled the stall, looking for an escape that didn't exist. Easy, Gabriella said, her voice shaking. Easy, boy. I'm sorry, I pushed too hard. It took 30 minutes for Phantasma to calm down. When he finally stood still, sides heaving with exhaustion, the halter hung broken on the ground. Gabriella left it there and slowly exited the stall. She was trembling so hard she had to sit down outside. That had been too close. One wrong move and Phantasma could have killed her. For the first time since beginning this project, Gabriella felt genuine fear, not of the horse, but of her own hubris. What made her think she could succeed where professional trainers had failed? That evening, bruised and shaken, Gabriella found her grandmother in the garden. The old woman was tending her roses, her movements slow but sure. At 83, she was the matriarch of the family, respected by all. Abuela, Gabriella said quietly. Can I ask you something? Her grandmother looked up, her weathered face creasing with concern when she saw Gabriella's expression. Sit, child, tell me. Gabriella told her everything about Phantasma's panic, about how close she'd come to serious injury, about her doubts. When she finished, her grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Your father had a gift with horses, she finally said. Did you know that? Gabriella shook her head. She knew so little about her father. He died when she was so young, and the family rarely spoke of him. He could gentle the wildest animals. Her grandmother continued, not through force but through understanding. He said horses could sense your soul, and if your soul was calm and true, they would trust you. She took Gabriella's hand in her gnarled fingers. You have his gift, Nieta, but gifts come with responsibility. The question isn't whether you can help that horse, it's whether helping him is worth the risk. If I give up now, Uncle Rodrigo will sell him, Gabriella said, and whoever buys him won't be patient. They'll either break him completely or destroy him. Then you have your answer, her grandmother said simply. But be smart, child. Courage without wisdom is just recklessness. Gabriella returned to Phantasma's stable the next morning with renewed purpose, but greater caution. She brought the broken halter and sat outside the stall, turning it over in her hands. I'm sorry, she told the stallion. I moved too fast. I was thinking about my deadline instead of about you. That won't happen again. She spent the next 3 days doing nothing but sitting with Phantasma, rebuilding the trust she damaged. On the 4th day, she brought a different halter, soft rope instead of leather. Nothing that would trigger memories of whatever trauma had scarred him. This time, she didn't try to put it on him. She just held it, let him smell it, and then set it in the corner of his stall. Over the next days, Phantasma investigated it on his own terms. Gabriella watched as curiosity overcame fear as the stallion nudged the halter, picked it up in his teeth, eventually stood with it draped over his neck like he'd put it there himself. When Gabriella finally slipped it on properly, exactly 4 weeks after she'd begun, Phantasma stood absolutely still. He trembled, his whole body tense, but he didn't panic. Gabriella scratched his neck gently, murmuring praise. Good boy, she whispered. Such a brave boy. That afternoon, she led Phantasma out of his stall for the first time since his arrival. The stallion balked at the doorway, afraid of the open space after months of confinement. But Gabriella stood beside him, patient and calm, and eventually he took that first step into the light. The transformation was immediate. Phantasma's head came up, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the mountains. His coat seemed to glow brighter in the sunlight. For a moment, Gabriella saw him as he must have been before the trauma. Proud, magnificent, joyful. They spent an hour simply walking around the enclosed paddock beside the stable. Phantasma jumped at shadows, startled at birds, but he never tried to flee. He stayed close to Gabriella, trusting her to keep him safe in this strange new world. Word spread through the estate that Gabriella had successfully led Phantasma outside. By the next morning, her entire family had gathered to watch. Don Rodrigo stood with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. Maya looked worried. The twins whispered to each other, clearly impressed despite their usual confidence. Gabriella felt the weight of their attention as she led Phantasma into the paddock. The stallion, sensitive to her attention, danced nervously. Gabriella took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax. This wasn't about proving anything to her family. This was about Phantasma. Show them who you really are, she whispered to the stallion. Not the broken, angry horse they bought. The noble creature you were always meant to be. She unclipped the lead rope, giving Phantasma complete freedom. The stallion stood still for a moment, processing this unexpected gift. Then he exploded into motion. He galloped around the paddock, his tail streaming behind him like a banner, his hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. The Andalusian trot, that spectacular high-stepping gait that made the breed famous, transformed into something almost supernatural. Phantasma moved like water, like wind, like living poetry. When he finally slowed to a stop, he was in the center of the paddock, sides heaving, eyes bright with something that looked like happiness. Gabriella walked to him slowly. The stallion lowered his great head, pressing his forehead against her chest in a gesture of trust so profound that Gabriella felt tears sting her eyes. She heard gasping from the fence and glanced up to see her family staring in wonder. Even Don Rodrigo looked moved. How? Her uncle asked simply. I listened to what he needed instead of imposing what I wanted, Gabriella replied. He didn't need to be broken. He needed to be healed. Don Rodrigo climbed over the fence, moving carefully. Phantasma tensed immediately, backing toward Gabriella. She laid a calming hand on his neck. It's all right, she murmured. This is my uncle. He owns this land. He won't hurt you. Her uncle stopped several feet away, respecting the stallion's space. Gabriella, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I thought you were being foolishly sentimental. I see now that you understood something none of us did. He turned to look at Phantasma, his weathered face thoughtful. Your father would have been very proud. Those words hit Gabriella harder than any praise. She'd spent 15 years being the quiet orphan, the one who didn't quite belong. Now, for the first time, she felt truly connected to the family legacy. Gabriella felt tears sting her eyes. Does this mean the sale is can-led? Don Rodrigo said firmly. Phantasma stays. You've proven he's not beyond help, and I won't let him go to France where they'll undo all your work. He paused, his voice growing warmer. Take all the time you need to complete his training properly. No more deadlines. You've earned that trust. Relief flooded through Gabriella so powerfully her knees weakened. Maya cheered from the fence. The twins applauded. Even the stable hands who'd gathered to watch were clapping and whistling. Thank you, Uncle, Gabriella whispered. Don Rodrigo stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. I've been a coward. I couldn't bear to look at you because you reminded me of everything I lost when your parents died. But I see now you have your father's gift, your mother's courage. Forgive me for wasting years pushing you away when I should have been teaching you everything I know. Gabriella couldn't speak. Her uncle pulled her into an embrace, the first she could remember since childhood. Around them, her family watched with wet eyes. Even Phantasma seemed to sense the significance of the moment, standing quietly beside them. Over the following months, Gabriella continued Phantasma's training. She worked with him daily, always moving at his pace, never forcing. She introduced him to saddles first, just laying them across his back while he grazed, eventually tightening the girth. Each step took weeks of patient preparation. She began teaching her cousins her techniques, showing them how to read the horse's emotional states, how to work with their natural instincts rather than against them. Javier, once so confident in traditional methods, proved an eager student. He'd spent years believing dominance was the only language horses understood. Now he discovered subtlety could be just as powerful. Christian had always been the most technical of the brothers, and he quickly grasped the theoretical aspects of Gabriella's approach. Together they developed new training protocols that reduced injuries to both animals and handlers. Even Maya, focused primarily on business, began incorporating Gabriella's philosophy into their marketing. The Hacienda Ventos became known not just for producing beautiful horses, but for treating them with unprecedented respect and care. The first time Gabriella mounted Phantasma, 6 months after their first meeting, the stallion stood like a statue carved from marble. She sat carefully, barely breathing, waiting for the explosion that never came. Instead, Phantasma turned his head to look back at her as if asking, "What now?" Gabriella laughed, the sound bubbling up from pure joy. "Now we dance," she said. She guided him into a walk, then a trot. Phantasma's movements were uncertain at first, confused by the weight on his back. But Gabriella moved with him, using her body to communicate rather than her hands, and gradually he understood. When they finally canered around the paddock, moving together as one being, Gabriella felt her soul soar. Don Rodrigo insisted on a public demonstration. Word had spread through the region about the impossible transformation transformation of the White Devil horse. Trainers, breeders, and wealthy collectors wanted to see for themselves. On a bright spring morning, more than 50 people gathered at the hacienda. Gabriella stood beside Phantasma, feeling exposed under so many staring eyes. The stallion sensed her nervousness and pressed close, offering comfort. "Ladies and gentlemen," Don Rodrigo announced, "my niece will demonstrate classical DR with Phantasma, the Carthusian stallion previously deemed untrainable." Gabriella led Phantasma to the center of the arena. She mounted smoothly and the stallion stood perfectly still. Then, with the subtlest of cues, she asked him to move. What followed was 40 minutes of breathtaking horsemanship. Gabriella guided Phantasma through path and elevated trots that made spectators gasp. They performed flying lead changes, switching smoothly from one canter lead to another. Most impressive was the Spanish walk, where Phantasma stretched each front leg forward in an exaggerated stride, demonstrating the power and grace of his breeding. But more than the technical skill, what moved the crowd was the clear bond between horse and rider. Gabriella rode with barely any contact on the reins. Every movement was a conversation, a request rather than a command, and Phantasma responded with evident joy, his ears pricked forward, his expression alert and happy. When they finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Gabriella slid from Phantasma's back and pressed her face against his neck, overwhelmed with emotion. The stallion turned his head, gently lipping her hair. Among the spectators was a distinguished elderly man with silver hair and an aristocratic bearing. He approached Don Rodrigo after the demonstration. "I am Count Mendoza," he said in a cultured voice. "I breed Carthusians at my estate in hers. I've been searching for new bloodlines to introduce to my program." He paused, watching Gabriella groom Phantasma in the corner of the arena. "I came here prepared to make an offer for that stallion. Now, I'm not sure any price would be adequate." Don Rodrigo smiled. "The horse isn't mine to sell, Count. He belongs to Gabriella." Count Mendoza raised his eyebrows. "Your groom, my niece?" Don Rodrigo corrected firmly. "And the finest trainer in Andalusia." The Count studied Gabriella with new respect. "Would she consider bringing Phantasma to stand at stud?" "I would pay handsomely for his bloodline, and I promise he would be treated with the respect he deserves." What followed were negotiations that lasted weeks. Gabriella, unused to business discussions, found herself overwhelmed by contracts and breeding rights. Maya stepped in to help, her business acumen proving invaluable. Together they structured an agreement that would provide Gabriella with substantial income while ensuring Phantasma would never again be mistreated. The contract was revolutionary. It specified that Phantasma would remain at the Hacienda Vientos and Mars would be brought to him rather than the other way around. Gabriella would have final approval over all breeding decisions. Most unusually, the contract included detailed welfare standards, ensuring Phantasma's emotional well-being was prioritized as highly as his physical care. "You've changed more than just one horse," Maya told her cousin one evening as they reviewed the final papers. "You've changed how people think about these animals. Trainers across Spain are talking about your methods." Gabriella looked out the window toward the paddock where Phantasma grazed in the evening light. "I didn't set out to change anything," she said softly. "I just wanted to help one broken horse heal." "Maybe that's exactly why you succeeded," Maya replied. "You weren't trying to prove anything. You just saw a soul in pain and offered compassion." As word of Gabriella's success spread, she began receiving requests from across Europe. Owners with difficult horses, animals deemed dangerous or untrainable, began arriving at the Hacienda Vientos. Gabriella worked with each one individually, never rushing, always patient. She discovered that many problem horses had similar histories to Phantasma, trauma, abuse, or simply terrible misunderstandings between human expectations and equine nature. With each horse she helped, Gabriella refined her approach. She began teaching others, hosting clinics where she demonstrated her methods. Don Rodrigo expanded the estate's facilities to accommodate Gabriella's growing reputation. A new training arena was built, designed with high windows for natural light and rounded corners to prevent horses from feeling trapped. Spacious paddocks replaced the old corral. The breeding program was restructured to emphasize temperament as highly as conformation. But through all the changes and success, Phantasma remained Gabriella's constant companion. Every morning, regardless of how busy her schedule became, she spent time with him. They would walk together through the olive groves, or she would simply sit in his paddock while he grazed, finding peace in his presence. 2 years after she first sat outside his stall, Gabriella took Phantasma to his first public competition. Not a breed show or a sales exhibition, but a classical doctor demonstration in Seville. They performed to music, a haunting flamenco piece that matched Phantasma's powerful yet elegant movements perfectly. Her family filled the front row. Don Rodrigo watched with undisguised pride. Maya recorded every moment on her phone. The twins whistled and cheered, embarrassing Gabriella but making her smile. Her grandmother, now 85 and frail, sat wrapped in shawls, her eyes bright with tears. When Gabriella and Phantasma completed their final canter, holding perfect collection as the music swelled to its crescendo, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening, but Gabriella barely heard it. She was focused on Phantasma, on the way his ears swiveled back to listen for her voice, on the trust that radiated from him. "We did it, boy," she whispered, leaning forward to pat his gleaming neck. "We showed them all who you really are." After the performance, as Gabriella cooled Phantasma down in a quiet corner of the venue, an old woman approached. approached. She was tiny, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. "Excuse me," she said in a quavering voice. "Are you the one who trained that white stallion?" "I helped him remember how to trust," Gabriella said. "But he did the real work." The old woman smiled. "I bred him, you know, or rather, my late husband did. Phantasma is from our last breeding season before my husband passed." Her eyes grew distant with memory. He had such high hopes for that cult. "But after my husband died, I had to sell everything." "The man who bought the young stock." She shook her head. "I heard later he was cruel. Used the old methods, the harsh ones. I've regretted that sale every day since." Gabriella felt her throat tighten. "He's safe now and happy. I promise you that." The old woman reached up to touch Phantasma's face. The stallion, who still tensed around most strangers, stood perfectly still, as if recognizing something in this tiny person. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving him the life my husband wanted for him." After the woman left, Gabriella stood in the golden evening light, processing this encounter. Phantasma had been loved once, had known kindness before cruelty shattered his trust, and now, through patience and compassion, he'd found his way back to wholeness. It made everything worthwhile. The long hours, the moments of doubt, the risk she'd taken defying her family's expectations. The estate at Hacienda Vientos continued to thrive under Gabriella's influence. She became a partner in the family business, her name carrying weight in equestrian circles across Europe. Horses she'd trained commanded premium prices not because they were broken to submission, but because they were confident, willing partners. On her 25th birthday, Don Rodrigo made an announcement at the family dinner. "I've decided to restructure ownership of the estate," he said, looking around the table at his children and niece. "Maya will inherit the business operations as she's proven her brilliance in that arena. The twins will manage the breeding programs together." He turned to Gabriella. "And you, my dear niece, will inherit the training facilities and the herd of Carthusian horses, including all of Phantasma's offspring." Gabriella sat stunned, unable to process what she just heard. "Uncle, no arguments," Don Rodrigo said firmly. "You've earned this 100 times over. You didn't just save one horse. You saved our family's reputation and taught us all to be better. Your father would be bursting with pride." His voice grew husky with emotion. "As am I." The family gathered around Gabriella, hugging her, laughing and crying together. Through the window, Gabriella could see Phantasma in his paddock, his white coat luminous in the moonlight. He stood looking toward the house, ears pricked forward as if he knew something significant was happening. Later that night, Gabriella walked out to his paddock. Phantasma nickered softly when he saw her walking over to press his forehead against her chest. Their special greeting that never failed to move her. "You changed my life," Gabriella told him, stroking his silky neck. "I was so lost, feeling like I'd never belong anywhere. And then you came along, angry, broken, impossible. Everyone said you were hopeless. They said I was foolish to try." She smiled through tears. "But we found each other, didn't we? Two lonely souls who just needed someone to understand." Phantasma breathed softly against her shoulder, and Gabriella felt the last pieces of her old insecurity finally dissolve. She wasn't the orphan cousin anymore. She wasn't the quiet one who lived in everyone's shadows. She was Gabriella Perez, trainer of horses, healer of broken spirits, and exactly where she was meant to be. The moon rose higher, painting the Andalusian landscape in silver. In the distance, other horses called to each other across the paddocks. The wind carried the scent of orange blossoms from the groves below, and Gabriella stood with Phantasma, two beings who'd saved each other. Finally, at peace under the stars. Years later, when people asked Gabriella about her success, she would always return to that first day. A young woman sitting on a wooden stool outside a stall, speaking gently to a horse everyone called a devil. She would talk about patience, about listening, about the courage to show up every day, even when progress seemed impossible. But mostly she would talk about love. Not the romantic kind celebrated in stories, but the deeper, harder love that refuses to give up on someone when the world already has. The love that says, "I see you. I see your pain, your fear, your hidden worth, and I'm not leaving." Phantasma lived to be 28 years old, producing offspring that carried his noble temperament and magnificent presence to farms across Europe. Long after he could no longer work, he remained at Gabriella's side, grazing peacefully in his paddock, greeting visitors who came to see the legendary stallion who changed the way people understood horses. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the estate was settling into sleep, people would see Gabriella sitting in Phantasma's paddock, leaning against his warm side, both of them content in the silence that comes from perfect understanding. The girl who'd felt invisible had found her purpose. The horse everyone had given up on had found his peace. Together, they'd created something beautiful. A legacy not of conquest or domination, but of compassion, patience, and the transformative power of refusing to give up on a wounded soul. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and please subscribe. We bring you powerful tales of horses and the humans who love them. Stories of transformation, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that change lives forever. Join our community of horse lovers for more inspiring stories that celebrate the magnificent spirit of these incredible animals.